Hi, everybody. We're here at Nashville North Studios with Susan Irland. Our group show this month was Secret Garden, and we're in here with Susan's Secret Garden, and we're lucky enough to have her here with us today to talk a little bit about how the art has made such an impact in her life and how through her art she has made an impact on others. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Susan. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
I have a brother and a sister. My father was a minister, so we were raised in a very conservative home, but it was a great childhood. We got to ride our bikes and read books, and I always said, though, we were like the 17th century little sculpture my father had in his office of the three little monkeys. You see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. So it was conservative in terms of how we were raised, but it was okay. It was okay. So that's my childhood. And
so that gave you some time since you were probably had some free time as a child too to explore in nature.
Yes, we did a lot of hiking and camping and outdoors, and nature certainly was part of our growing up. We did state parks, New York state parks we would go to on the weekends, and it was a good way to live. It was a good way to live. There was freedom back then where you could say to your children, come back for supper, and you could go to the swimming hole and you could ride your bikes, and it was a nice way to go.
A different world.
A different world back then, yes.
So what was your first art experience?
My first art experience, when I was very young, my father decided to become a minister, so he packed up my sister and I. My brother was born later, and we moved to New York, and as a part-time job, he drove a school bus. And driving a school bus meant that he would take groups of students to different museums in the city. And while the students were looking in the museums, he would go in and look too. And if he went someplace where he thought it was a good thing to bring us to, then we would get a trip to the museum. So my first trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York was when I was 5 years old, and Dad took me to the Egyptian wing. And I can remember very vividly being in the atrium of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and then going into the Egyptian wing and couldn't quite believe that there was somebody in that mummy case. But it was a very impactful visit. It stuck with me, I think, from the get-go, that there was a big world out there that I would like to know more about.
And so when you did your first painting, was it influenced by the Egyptian work? Or
no, it wasn't. No. My first painting was of a beagle. And my parents, for Christmas one year, gave me the little wooden box with the paints and a little palette and brushes. And I remember thinking that was just the coolest gift because I was only 12 and I had this very sophisticated paint box. And I painted a beagle, and I did it while I was babysitting for a friend's child, and the beagle belonged to them. And when I brought it home, we had a dog named Sam, and Sam barked at the painting. So I was very excited to think that I had done such a good job painting the beagle. So that was my first painting.
Well, that sounds like rave reviews.
That's rave reviews.
That's right. And so this, then did you pursue art school, or what did you do?
Well, I had a traditional high school experience. I will say that in high school, I was very bored in a lot of classes. I liked English class because you could write, and that was creativity. And to this day, I think writing and painting and music, creating music, all have similarities. It's just the tools you use are different. And I do remember vividly that Miss Taylor, the art teacher, would just let me escape from my other classes and go to the back of the art room and do what I wanted to do. That was the good part of it. The bad part of it was I don't think she ever really taught me anything other than giving me freedom. So that part was good. But when I then went to school and went and got certified to teach, I really was very diligent in teaching children the things they needed to know to appreciate art and create art and understand art. So,
well, if I may interject here, during your stay in our solo room, we've had many people come in, and they have remarked how well you taught children and how you spoke to the children as if they were actually people, which a lot of children don't get spoken to that way. So that's a great credit to you that you could reach them on a good level.
They did great things. They did great things.
And what teachers impacted your approach? Would that have been one of them?
I would say the freedom was certainly from Miss Taylor in high school. And as an undergraduate in college, my advisor again gave me a lot of freedom. Again, I don't really think that they gave me tools to understand things. But then when I went to graduate school, and the professors I had, and I can't say any one particular professor impacted me more than others, because every class I took at FIT, at Parsons, at Long Island University, any of the studio classes that I took, it seemed like every instructor gave me something I didn't know. And that really was a big influence in terms of understanding.
So that was another tool in your box.
Right,
so
another tool in the box.
Yeah, which you need a lot of tools to be an artist.
Yeah. Yes.
You certainly do. And so your ideas from art when you were in college, when you were in high school, did it start in nature for your painting, or was it other structures, or?
Well, when I would say nature initially, but then I explored a lot of different types of art. Just because by virtue of the classes you took, you got to explore different types of art. But I was never really in different mediums. I was never real comfortable as an undergraduate with painting. And that took me a long time, and I do think it takes time. I don't think, well, I always tell my students there's no such thing as instant art. And I do think it takes years to develop your ability to see, your ability to create. And so it took me a long time to get real comfortable with the idea of being a painter.
Sure. Sure. The ability to see in life is elusive to many, you know. But of course, in your line of work, painting, it's very important to be able to see and understand what you see. Yeah. So, what kind of research do you do once you get an idea of a subject? What is your research?
Depends on what I'm working on, obviously, but I will usually come up with, if I've used photography, I sometimes use my own photography, sometimes I use 5-7 images before I'll come up with my composition. If I'm stuck, I love to look at the artists of the past and see how they handled particular things. So that's the kind of research I do. A lot of the times I will look at the artists of the past. I will look at my own references. I will look at references that have nothing to do with what I'm going to do, just to get my head working. And then eventually it'll come together for me.
So it's part of the challenge.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so the research falls into line with as part of the challenge. So does the place you live influence your art?
I think anybody would be crazy to say it doesn't. Everybody, if I lived in Alaska, I might be painting, white polar bears, but obviously if you look at my work, you can see where I've traveled. You can see the places I love and the things that I love. But then again, I sometimes like to venture into a political statement. So there's different ways you can use religion as a source. There's so many sources of inspiration, and I like to explore all different ones. A friend of mine who was an art critic once said, "You're a group show of one," but I like that. I could not. I'm just for my own personal development. I couldn't sit and do all flowers or all birds or all. I need to explore different things, and that's fun.
Well, basically what happens, do you think this is true? It is for me when I do, let's say, one bird, and then I end up over the years doing a number of birds. I consider that a series.
Right.
Do you also?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, the flowers are definitely a series. And I enjoy doing them, because I love the beauty of nature. But at this point right now, I don't see myself painting another flower painting,
But didn't you just do a whole bunch of flowers for your calendar?
Yeah, I did 12 months, and that was kind of a challenge to pick a month and then decide what flowers bloom in that month, and that was kind of fun, and technically some of them were quite challenging.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And to paint them when they're not readily available for you.
And that's an example of coming up with like 3 to 5 references and then making it your own,
How do you know when you're doing your painting if it's done?
I think you do. I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but when I feel like I'm almost done, I will take and look it over inch by inch by inch by inch by inch by inch till I've covered the entire surface to see if there's something else that maybe I should do. And then I know. I think most artists would know when they're finished.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to tell them to put the brush down and step away from the painting.
Yeah. That's right.
Sometimes I just say that anyway. Yeah. So, what artists are you most influenced by?
Numerous ones. I just it depends on the artist how they've impacted my mental thinking more than maybe the way what I do. I have a great respect for American painters, whether they're the photorealists, whether depends on what part of the 20th century they were in. George Bellows, Andrew Wyeth, Jamie Wyeth. I mean, George O'Keeffe. The list could go on and on and on of the people that I look at. I have quite a library of art books, and I, will use them, when I'm thinking through ideas. And I was a studio and art history major as an undergrad, so art history is really important to me in terms of understanding the world we live in. So.
And as part of your research.
And it's part of my research.
Yeah. Well, some of your paintings are technically difficult. The fine braiding of the ropes, and you must have a great amount of patience.
I do it gradually, like I can spend a couple hours and then I have to step away from the painting. And then I'll go back and I'll work a few more hours. And, sometimes you'll hear an artist say, oh, I did that in a few hours. And I go, I've never, ever created a painting in a few hours. Yeah, even if it's small. I mean, I can work on it for weeks, to get it where I want it to be. So I kind of jealous of the people that say they can create a painting real fast.
Well, maybe they thought about it for a long time. They might not realize that they really worked on it longer than they are admitting.
Yeah.
So the inspiration for your painting comes from your surroundings. It can come from nature or the sea. It can come from political aspects. And but your message is almost always one of happiness and joy. Yes. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so the places that you've been and the beauty that surrounds you also led you to write your book, which is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
And it was launched last year, I believe it was, at the Smithville Inn. And it's a telepathic traveler featuring Macho Monkey on the cover. And we have Macho Monkey in the studio today, but he's not speaking. So we do have Susan's book here for sale, Telepathic Traveler, and it's a wonderful children's book. I bought one for my granddaughter, and she enjoys it enormously.
Good.
Yes, and she'll be 9 this weekend.
Oh, great.
So she's had it since you released it. Yes. So back to your paintings a little bit. Is it hard for you? Some artists don't want to sell their work. It's hard for them to let go. Is that something you find for your paintings?
I'm not somebody that has a problem letting it go. When I'm in it is when it's relevant to me.
Yes.
But when it's done, it's done. And if I look at a painting a year later and then I look at my hand, I go, oh, I did that? Because I'm no longer in it.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
it's now just a painting, you know.
Yeah, so you release it when you're finished.
When I'm finished, it's finished, yeah.
Very good, very good attitude. And does your art represent something about you?
Oh, I think all art represents you. You know, I think the beauty of the world we live in just reflects how I feel about the world we live in. When I go to Maine, or I go to New England, or I go to Vermont, or you know, I went to school in New York City, but New York City doesn't hold beauty for me. You know, if you want to use an example, but being on the coast of Maine, just I love the air, I love the smell, I love the beauty of it. Long Island, same thing. And I think for me, the end of Long Island and the Maine coast, there's something about the atmosphere in both of those places that really captures life in such a bright, cheerful way.
And the light.
And the light, yeah, the light is amazing. Yeah.
Is there artwork here that you are most proud of? Anything in particular?
I don't think of art with pride. I think of it as a challenge lots of times. And sometimes I'm pleased with the result of the challenge. But I think that's a little different than pride.
Okay.
You know, I like the challenge, and sometimes when I start a piece, I go, what was I thinking? I mean, Porpoise Point is a good example of that because of all the details that were in it. But most of the time, yeah, there are pieces that I go, don't know, but I stick with it, you know, and I like the challenge of that.
Is there an element of your art that you enjoy working with the most?
Well, of the elements of art, I think space would be the one that you'd have to put in the forefront, because then color, line, texture, all the other elements are going to fall into place. But how you use space, whether it's a bird or a flower or a ship rigging, you know, how you use that space to me is real important, you know.
And do you have any final thoughts you would like to leave with us about anything?
I hope when people look at my artwork that they find a sense of peace and beauty. But the art critic Jerry Saltz said, when you put your work out there, it becomes whatever that person perceives.
Yes.
And so I hope people perceive positive things when they look at my work.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Well, we want to thank you today, Susan Irland, for being here with us and for sharing your work at Nashville North Studios. It's meant a lot to a lot of people, and you've had many happy buyers taking pieces home, so they'll have their forever artwork with them.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.